In the quiet little town of Willow Creek, life moved at a slow, peaceful pace. The streets were lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and colorful flower beds that seemed to bloom year-round. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved hello. Every morning, kids rode their bikes down shaded lanes and everyone knew each other by name, or at least by face. To most people, Willow Creek felt like paradise. But beneath its picture-perfect surface, there were cracks in the foundation, small tensions simmering just out of sight. Sheriff Marcus Reed had lived in Willow Creek for nearly 2 decades. After years of serving on the force in a big city, he'd moved here seeking calm after retirement. He loved everything about this town: the fresh air, the friendly faces, and the sense of belonging. His home sat near the edge of the neighborhood, surrounded by tall oak trees that gave him privacy, but also made him feel connected to nature. Life was good, or so he thought. But no neighborhood is without its quirks, and Willow Creek's came in the form of Patricia Hargrove. If you asked anyone in town about Patricia, they'd describe her as intense, particular, or maybe even a handful. She was the head of the Homeowners Association, HOA, a position she took very seriously, perhaps too seriously. Patricia wasn't your average HOA leader. She didn't just enforce rules, she lived them. Every blade of grass had to be cut to regulation height. Every mailbox painted the approved shade of white. And heaven forbid if someone left a car parked on their driveway overnight. Patricia patrolled the streets daily, clipboard in one hand, and a smartphone in the other, ready to document any infraction. To say Patricia was passionate about following the rules would be an understatement. She sent emails, handwritten notes, and sometimes even showed up unannounced at people's doors to remind them of what they were doing wrong. Most residents found her exhausting, but few dared to challenge her because, well, Patricia always seemed to have the upper hand. Whether it was threatening fines or organizing neighborhood petitions, she had ways of making sure her voice was heard loud and clear. For Sheriff Reed, however, things started getting complicated when he decided to park his recreational vehicle, RV, in his driveway. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a modest camper van he used for weekend getaways and family trips. But according to the HOA guidelines, RVs weren't allowed to stay parked on driveways for more than 24 hours. Reed figured it wouldn't hurt to leave it there for a couple of days while he worked on some repairs before heading out on his next adventure. It was temporary, harmless, and certainly not worth causing a fuss over. Unfortunately, Patricia didn't see it that way. Within hours of spotting the RV, she was knocking on Reed's door, clipboard in tow. Her tone was polite yet firm as she explained the rule violation and handed him a copy of the HOA guidelines. Reed listened patiently, nodding along as she spoke. When she finished, he assured her that the RV would only be there temporarily and promised to move it soon. Satisfied, for now, Patricia left, though not without giving him a pointed look that suggested she'd be watching closely. Over the next few days, Reed noticed subtle changes around his property. First, there was a note taped to his front door reminding him of the RV policy. Then came another, this time tucked under his windshield wiper. Each message grew increasingly passive-aggressive, culminating in a formal letter delivered via certified mail. By then, Reed realized this wasn't going to blow over easily. Patricia wasn't backing down, and neither was he. Their first real confrontation happened on a crisp autumn afternoon. Reed was washing his patrol car, a habit he'd kept up even after retiring, when Patricia marched across the street, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She stopped at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed, glaring at the RV like it was some sort of eyesore ruining the entire neighborhood. "You've had plenty of time to deal with this," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "The rules are clear, Sheriff. You can't keep breaking them just because you think you're above everyone else." Reed straightened up, drying his hands on a rag. He tried to remain calm, knowing how quickly emotions could flare in situations like this. "Patricia," he began, keeping his tone measured, "I understand where you're coming from, but I need a little more time. The RV will be gone by the end of the week, I promise." "That's what you said 3 days ago," she shot back, her cheeks flushing red. "And yet here it still is. Rules apply to everyone, Marcus, even you." Her words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they highlighted the growing rift between them. Reed prided himself on being fair and level-headed, traits that had earned him respect during his career in law enforcement. But dealing with Patricia felt different. There was something about her relentless pursuit of perfection that rubbed him the wrong way, making it hard to stay composed. As the argument dragged on, Reed could feel the tension rising. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, curious about the commotion. Patricia's voice grew louder, drawing more attention than either of them wanted. Finally, realizing they weren't going to reach an agreement anytime soon, Reed held up his hands in surrender. "Fine, Patricia, I'll take care of it," he said firmly. "But let's try to resolve this without turning it into a spectacle, okay?" Patricia hesitated for a moment, then turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering under her breath. Reed watched her go, shaking his head. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a much bigger problem, one that would test his patience, his principles, and ultimately, his ability to keep the peace in Willow Creek. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. As Reed stood in his driveway staring at the RV, he couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was brewing. And deep down, he wondered whether Patricia Hargrove was truly fighting for the good of the community, or if she had something else entirely in mind. The tension between Sheriff Marcus Reed and Patricia Hargrove simmered for days after their heated exchange in the driveway. What started as a minor disagreement over an RV parked on private property had escalated into something far more personal. Patricia wasn't just upset about the rules being broken, she saw it as a direct challenge to her authority. And in Willow Creek, where she prided herself on maintaining order, any defiance was unacceptable. Reed tried to brush off the situation, telling himself that Patricia would eventually calm down once the RV was gone. But deep down, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that this wasn't going to end quietly. Over the next few days, strange things began happening around his home. At first they were small annoyances, his mailbox dented, tires deflated overnight, and even a rock thrown through one of his front windows. Each incident felt like a warning shot, though there was no proof linking them directly to Patricia. Still, Reed couldn't help but wonder if she was behind it all. One evening, as Reed sat on his porch sipping coffee and flipping through a newspaper, he noticed movement near the edge of his property. It was dark, but the moonlight illuminated enough for him to make out a figure standing by the trees that separated his yard from Patricia's. His heart skipped a beat when he realized who it was. Patricia herself, holding what appeared to be a rifle. The sight froze him in place. He blinked hard, thinking maybe his eyes were playing tricks on him, but the image didn't disappear. She was pointing the weapon straight at him. Adrenaline surged through Reed's body as instinct kicked in. He ducked behind the railing of his porch, his mind racing. Was she serious? Could she really intend to harm him? For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe it wasn't loaded, or perhaps she was only trying to scare him into compliance. But Reed knew better than to take chances. As a former law enforcement officer, he understood the gravity of someone wielding a firearm regardless of intent. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It had crossed into dangerous territory. Carefully, Reed reached for his phone and dialed his department. His hands trembled slightly as he whispered into the receiver, explaining the situation and requesting backup. "I need an armed unit here immediately," he said, keeping his voice low so as not to provoke Patricia further. "She's got a rifle aimed at me." On the other end of the line, dispatch assured him help was on the way, but Reed knew he couldn't wait idly. If Patricia decided to act impulsively, seconds could mean the difference between life and death. While waiting for reinforcements, Reed tried to think strategically. He recalled everything he'd learned during his years on the force about de-escalation and conflict resolution. Though his instincts screamed at him to retaliate or confront her, head-on he forced himself to stay calm. Acting rashly would only worsen the situation. Instead, he focused on finding a way to communicate with Patricia without escalating tensions further. Peering cautiously over the railing, Reed called out to her. "Patricia," he shouted, his tone firm but controlled. "What are you doing?" "Lower the gun. We can talk about this." There was no immediate response. She remained motionless, the rifle still pointed in his direction. Reed swallowed hard, his pulse pounding in his ears. He repeated himself, louder this time. "This isn't the answer, Patricia. Let's sort this out peacefully." Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice sharp and filled with anger. "You've been ignoring me, Marcus. Ignoring the rules, ignoring my warnings. You think you're above everyone else because you're the sheriff, but you're not." Her words came out in a rush, tinged with desperation. "I've done everything. I can to make you listen, but you refuse. Well, I'm done playing games." Reed clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to argue back. He needed to keep her talking, not just to buy time for backup to arrive, but also to understand what had driven her to such extremes. "Patricia, I hear you," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I know how important the rules are to you, and I respect that. But this isn't the way to handle things. Pointing a gun at someone is serious, it's illegal, and it puts everyone in danger." For a brief moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Patricia shifted uncomfortably, her grip on the rifle tightening. Then, almost reluctantly, she lowered the barrel slightly, though it remained within striking distance. "You don't get it, Marcus," she muttered bitterly. "No one listens to me unless I make them. All I want is for people to follow the rules, to care about our community the way I do. Why is that so hard?" Her vulnerability caught Reed off guard. Beneath the anger and frustration, there was a hint of sadness, a longing for validation that she clearly wasn't getting. In that instant, Reed realized that this standoff wasn't really about the RV or the HOA guidelines. It was about control, about feeling powerless in a world where others didn't share her vision of perfection. While her methods were extreme, her motivations weren't entirely unreasonable. Still, Reed knew sympathy wouldn't solve the problem. "I get it, Patricia," he replied softly, "but we can't resolve this with threats or weapons. Put the rifle down, and let's find another way forward. Together." His voice carried sincerity, a genuine effort to bridge the gap between them. For a fleeting second, it seemed like she might actually consider it. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and the rifle dipped further toward the ground. Just then, the distant sound of sirens pierced the night air. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees as patrol cars approached Reed's house. Officers spilled out of the vehicles, guns drawn, shouting commands for Patricia to drop her weapon. The sudden intrusion shattered the fragile calm that had begun to form. Panic flickered across Patricia's face as she raised the rifle again, her earlier vulnerability replaced by raw fear. "Stay back!" she screamed, her voice cracking under the pressure. "Don't come any closer!" The officers formed a perimeter around her, their training kicking in as they attempted to regain control of the situation. Reed stepped forward cautiously, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Patricia, please," he pleaded. "It's over. Just put the gun down before someone gets hurt." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she hesitated, torn between surrendering and lashing out. The standoff stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, with a choked sob, Patricia dropped the rifle to the ground and collapsed to her knees, burying her face in her hands. Officers moved in swiftly, securing the weapon and placing her under arrest. As they led her away in handcuffs, she cast one last defiant glare at Reed, her lips trembling as she vowed to fight back against what she saw as injustice. The adrenaline coursing through Reed's veins began to fade, leaving him drained and shaken. He watched as Patricia disappeared into the backseat of a squad car, her cries echoing faintly in the night. Neighbors who had gathered at a safe distance now whispered among themselves, some shocked, others outraged. Reed exhaled deeply, grateful that the situation hadn't ended in violence, but acutely aware of the damage already done. As the commotion died down and the officers packed up their gear, Reed lingered in his driveway, staring at the spot where Patricia had stood moments earlier. The weight of what had transpired settled heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just a story of a disgruntled neighbor taking things too far. It was a stark reminder of how easily misunderstandings and unchecked emotions could spiral out of control. Willow Creek, for all its charm, was not immune to conflict, and Reed knew that rebuilding trust within the community would require patience, empathy, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of relief. The immediate crisis had passed and Patricia was safely in custody. But as he turned back toward his house, Reed couldn't shake the lingering question. How had it come to this? And more importantly, what could he do to ensure it never happened again? The aftermath of Patricia Hargrove's arrest rippled through Willow Creek like a stone dropped into still water. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, sharing their thoughts about what had happened that fateful night. Some were quick to side with Sheriff Marcus Reed, praising him for handling the situation with calmness and professionalism despite the danger. Others, however, sympathized with Patricia, believing she'd been pushed too far by years of dismissive attitudes toward her efforts to maintain order in the neighborhood. The divide was palpable, turning once friendly streets into battlegrounds of opinion. For Reed, the days following the incident were anything but peaceful. News of the confrontation spread quickly, fueled by social media posts and hushed conversations. At the local coffee shop, he became the center of attention, both praised and criticized, depending on who you asked. Some residents stopped him on his morning walks to thank him for standing up to Patricia's overbearing behavior, while others avoided eye contact altogether. It was clear that the community was divided, and Reed couldn't help but feel responsible for finding a way to heal the rift. Meanwhile, Patricia sat in a holding cell, stewing in anger and humiliation. Her arrest had been humiliating enough, but the public nature of the event made it even worse. Local news outlets picked up the story, painting her as an unhinged HOA Karen who had taken her obsession with rules to dangerous extremes. To her, it felt like the entire world was against her. She refused to speak to anyone except her lawyer, insisting that she'd acted out of desperation and fear, not malice. In her mind, she was protecting her home, her neighborhood, and everything she held dear. But no one seemed willing to listen anymore. Back in Willow Creek, life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy, or at least as close to normal as it could get under the circumstances. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting to discuss how to move forward without Patricia. While many members admired her dedication, they also recognized the need for a leader who could foster harmony rather than conflict. After much deliberation, they appointed Sarah Collins, a soft-spoken yet firm woman with a reputation for fairness, as the interim president. Her first order of business? Rebuilding trust within the community. Sarah wasted no time organizing a town hall meeting, inviting all residents to voice their concerns and ideas for improving neighborhood relations. Reed attended reluctantly, knowing full well that he'd be scrutinized from every angle. As he walked into the packed community center, he felt dozens of eyes on him, some curious, others accusatory. Still, he took a seat near the front, determined to face whatever came his way. The meeting began with Sarah addressing the room, her tone gentle but resolute. "We've all been through a lot recently," she said, scanning the crowd. "And while we may not agree on everything, I believe we can find common ground if we're willing to listen to each other." Her words struck a chord, prompting murmurs of agreement from several attendees. Encouraged, she opened the floor for discussion. One by one, residents stood up to share their thoughts. Some expressed frustration with the strictness of the HOA rules, arguing that they stifled individuality and creativity. Others defended the guidelines, saying they helped preserve property values and kept the neighborhood looking its best. Few brave souls admitted feeling intimidated by Patricia's methods, describing instances where they'd been singled out or publicly shamed for minor infractions. Each story added another layer to the complex web of emotions surrounding the issue. When it was Reed's turn to speak, he hesitated briefly before rising from his chair. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. Taking a deep breath, he began. "I won't pretend to have all the answers," he said, his voice steady but sincere. "But I do know that none of us signed up for this kind of division when we chose to live here. Willow Creek is supposed to be a place where we feel safe, supported, and connected. What happened with Patricia? It wasn't just about an RV or a set of rules. It was about people forgetting how to talk to each other." He paused, letting his words sink in. I'm not excusing what she did. I don't condone pointing a weapon at anyone, ever. But I think we owe it to ourselves and to each other to understand why things escalated the way they did. Maybe we've been too focused on rules and not enough on relationships. Maybe we've let small disagreements grow into something bigger because we didn't take the time to listen. Reed's speech resonated deeply with many in the room. Heads nodded in agreement, and a few people even clapped softly. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of hope, a glimmer of possibility that the community could come together again. After the meeting, Reed stayed behind to chat with Sarah and a few other neighbors. They brainstormed ways to foster better communication, such as creating a neighborhood app for sharing updates and concerns, hosting regular potluck dinners to encourage bonding, and revisiting some of the more contentious HOA rules to make them less rigid. Reed offered to host a block party at his house as a gesture of goodwill, hoping it would serve as a fresh start for everyone. As the days passed, Reed noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere around Willow Creek. People smiled more often, waved, "Hello," and lingered longer during chance encounters. Conversations shifted from complaints about Patricia to discussions about upcoming events and shared interests. Slowly but surely, the tension began to ease. Still, Reed knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Healing a fractured community required patience, consistency, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. There would always be disagreements, rules to follow, and personalities to navigate. But if Willow Creek could learn to prioritize empathy and understanding over rigidity and judgment, it might emerge stronger than ever before. Late one evening, as Reed sat on his porch watching the sunset, he reflected on everything that had transpired. The RV was long gone, stored safely, off-site to avoid further conflict. His mailbox had been repaired, his tires replaced, and the broken window fixed. Yet the scars left by the standoff ran deeper than any physical damage. They served as a reminder of how fragile trust could be, and how vital it was to nurture. Despite the challenges, Reed felt optimistic. He believed in the goodness of people and their capacity to change and grow. And though he couldn't undo the past, he could work toward a future where Willow Creek thrived not because of its rules, but because of the connections between its residents. With that thought in mind, he leaned back in his chair, letting the cool breeze wash over him. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to rebuild, reconnect, and remind everyone, including himself, that even in the most divided moments, unity was possible. The weeks that followed the dramatic confrontation between Sheriff Marcus Reed and Patricia Hargrove brought a mix of relief and uncertainty to Willow Creek. While the immediate crisis had been resolved, the underlying tensions simmered just beneath the surface. The neighborhood was trying to move forward, but old wounds weren't healing as quickly as everyone hoped. For Reed, life felt like walking on eggshells. Every interaction carried an unspoken weight, every conversation tinged with caution. Patricia's absence loomed large over the community. Though she was no longer physically present in the neighborhood, her influence lingered in unexpected ways. Some residents admitted missing her meticulous attention to detail, while others were glad for the reprieve from her constant scrutiny. Her teenage son, Ethan, became a quiet figure of sympathy. He rarely left the house, and when he did, it was clear he carried the burden of his mother's actions. Neighbors whispered about how hard it must have been for him to watch her spiral out of control, and some even reached out to offer support. But Ethan mostly kept to himself, avoiding eye contact and retreating into solitude whenever someone approached. Meanwhile, Sarah Collins, the new interim HOA president, worked tirelessly to steer the association in a more positive direction. She understood that rebuilding trust required more than just changing leadership. It demanded a fundamental shift in how the HOA operated. Gone were the days of nitpicking minor infractions or sending passive-aggressive letters. Instead, Sarah focused on fostering open communication and encouraging collaboration. Under her guidance, the HOA held regular coffee chats, informal gatherings where residents could voice their concerns without fear of judgment. These meetings proved surprisingly effective, giving people a platform to air grievances and share ideas in a constructive way. But despite these efforts, not everyone was ready to let go of the past. A small faction of residents remained loyal to Patricia, viewing her arrest as an overreaction orchestrated by Reed. They argued that enforcing rules was essential for preserving the neighborhood's charm and value, dismissing calls for leniency as weakness. This group, though small, was vocal, often stirring up controversy during HOA meetings and online forums. Their persistence created friction, making it difficult for Sarah to implement changes smoothly. Reed found himself caught in the middle of this ongoing tug-of-war. On one hand, he appreciated Sarah's efforts to modernize the HOA and prioritize harmony. On the other hand, he struggled to connect with those who still sided with Patricia, feeling frustrated by their refusal to acknowledge the severity of what had happened. He knew better than anyone that Patricia's actions had crossed a line, yet he also recognized the importance of addressing their concerns respectfully. After all, alienating them would only deepen the divide. One day, Reed decided to take matters into his own hands. Inspired by Sarah's coffee chats, he organized a casual gathering at his house, a backyard barbecue designed to bring neighbors together in a relaxed setting. He invited everyone, including Patricia's supporters, hoping to break down barriers through food, laughter, and genuine connection. Preparing for the event gave him a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about mending fences, but reminding everyone of the shared humanity that bound them together. The day of the barbecue arrived bright and sunny, with a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the oak trees surrounding Reed's property. Long picnic tables were set up on the lawn, laden with platters of grilled burgers, hot dogs, salads, and desserts contributed by various neighbors. Strings of fairy lights twinkled overhead, casting a warm glow as evening approached. Reed greeted each guest personally, thanking them for coming and encouraging them to mingle freely. At first, the atmosphere was awkward. Groups formed naturally along familiar lines, with clusters of friends chatting comfortably while others stood apart, unsure of where they fit in. Reed noticed Patricia's supporters huddled near the edge of the yard, exchanging wary glances and keeping their distance from the rest of the crowd. Determined to bridge the gap, he made his way over to them, carrying a plate of food and a friendly smile. "Hey there," he said warmly, extending the plate toward them. "I figured you might be hungry. Thought I'd save you a trip to the table." His tone was light, inviting, and free of judgment. One of the women hesitated before accepting the offering, mumbling a quiet, "Thank you." Encouraged, Reed pulled up a chair and joined them, leaning back casually as if he belonged. For several minutes no one spoke. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Reed broke it with a light-hearted comment about the weather. Slowly, the ice began to melt. Someone mentioned how nice the setup looked, another complimented the burgers, and soon they were talking about everyday topics, school events, local businesses, weekend plans. By the time dessert rolled around, the initial tension had dissipated, replaced by genuine camaraderie. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the backyard, Reed stood up to address the entire group. Holding a glass of lemonade aloft, he cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. "First off, thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice carrying easily over the hum of conversation. "This is exactly what we need more of. Spending time together, getting to know each other beyond our differences." He paused, scanning the faces illuminated by the soft glow of the fairy lights. "Look, I know things haven't been easy lately. We've had our fair share of disagreements, and honestly, I don't expect us to agree on everything moving forward. But here's the thing. We're neighbors. That means we're stuck with each other, for better or worse. And if we can find ways to work together instead of against each other, we'll be stronger for it." His words resonated deeply, prompting nods and murmurs of agreement throughout the crowd. A few people clapped softly and someone shouted, "Hear, hear." Reed smiled, feeling a swell of pride. For the first time in months, it felt like progress was possible. Afterward, as guests lingered over s'mores and cups of coffee, Reed found himself reflecting on the evening. It hadn't been perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, lingering resentments, and unanswered questions. but it had been a start. Building bridges took time, especially after such a divisive event, but Reed believed in the power of small steps. Every handshake, every shared laugh, every moment of understanding brought Willow Creek closer to becoming the tight-knit community it was meant to be. As the last stragglers packed up and headed home, Reed sank into a chair on his porch, exhausted but content. The night had exceeded his expectations, proving that even in the face of conflict, people were capable of coming together. He glanced at the RV parked discreetly in a corner of his driveway, a reminder of how far they'd come since that fateful argument. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, Reed allowed himself to bask in the warmth of hope, a fragile yet powerful force that had the potential to transform not just Willow Creek, but the hearts of everyone who called it home. As the weeks turned into months, Willow Creek began to settle into a new rhythm. The scars left by Patricia Hargrove's dramatic exit still lingered, but they were slowly fading under the weight of shared experiences and renewed efforts to build connections. For Sheriff Marcus Reed, the barbecue had marked a turning point, a moment when the neighborhood collectively decided to focus on what united them rather than what divided them. Yet, even as progress was made, life in Willow Creek wasn't without its challenges. One of the biggest hurdles came in the form of rebuilding trust with those who remained staunchly loyal to Patricia. Though their numbers were small, their voices carried significant weight during HOA meetings and community discussions. They argued that rules existed for a reason, and that loosening them would lead to chaos. Sarah Collins, the interim HOA president, listened patiently to their concerns, often finding herself caught between two opposing sides, those advocating for flexibility and understanding, and those clinging to structure and tradition. Reed admired Sarah's ability to remain neutral, though he sometimes worried that her attempts to please everyone might backfire. He knew firsthand how difficult it was to strike a balance between fairness and firmness. Still, he supported her wholeheartedly, attending meetings whenever possible and offering input when asked. His presence seemed to reassure some residents, particularly those who initially doubted his intentions after the standoff with Patricia. To further bridge gaps within the community, Reed proposed organizing regular neighborhood projects, activities that required teamwork and cooperation. Whether it was planting flowers along the main street, cleaning up the local park, or painting benches at the community center, these initiatives provided opportunities for neighbors to work side by side toward common goals. Over time, these shared experiences fostered camaraderie, breaking down barriers that had once felt insurmountable. One such project involved renovating the old gazebo in the heart of Willow Creek. Once a beloved gathering spot, it had fallen into disrepair over the years, its faded paint and creaky floorboards serving as a reminder of neglect. With Sarah's blessing, Reed spearheaded the effort to restore it, enlisting volunteers from across the neighborhood. To his delight, people showed up in droves, eager to contribute their skills and energy. On the first day of the renovation, Reed arrived early with tools in hand, ready to tackle whatever lay ahead. As others trickled in, he greeted each person warmly, assigning tasks based on their strengths. Some painted, others hammered nails, and a few brought snacks and drinks to keep spirits high. Laughter echoed through the air as neighbors joked and teased one another, the kind of easy banter that comes naturally when people are working together towards something meaningful. Among the volunteers was Ethan Hargrove, Patricia's teenage son. Reed hadn't expected him to show up, given how withdrawn he'd been since his mother's arrest. But there he was, standing awkwardly near the edge of the group, holding a paintbrush and looking unsure of himself. Reed approached him, cautiously, not wanting to overwhelm him. "Hey, Ethan," Reed said, keeping his tone casual. "Glad you're here. We could use an extra pair of hands." Ethan nodded silently, avoiding eye contact. Sensing his discomfort, Reed added, "Why don't you start with this section? It's pretty straightforward." He pointed to a patch of woodwork that needed touching up, giving Ethan a clear task without pressuring him. Throughout the day, Reed kept an eye on Ethan, checking in occasionally to see if he needed anything. At first, Ethan worked quietly, focusing intently on his brushstrokes. But as the hours passed, he began interacting more with the other volunteers, exchanging smiles and nods. By the end of the day, he was laughing along with a group of teenagers who had taken him under their wing. Watching this transformation filled Reed with quiet satisfaction. It was proof that healing was possible, even in the most unexpected ways. The success of the gazebo project inspired similar initiatives throughout Willow Creek. Residents formed committees to address various aspects of community life, from beautification efforts to safety improvements. Reed played an active role in many of these endeavors, using his experience as both a sheriff and a neighbor to guide decision-making. His involvement helped dispel lingering doubts about his leadership, earning him respect even from former critics. Yet, despite the positive momentum, there were moments when old tensions resurfaced. During one particularly heated HOA meeting, a vocal minority demanded stricter enforcement of parking regulations, citing recent complaints about cars blocking driveways. The debate grew contentious, with tempers flaring and accusations flying. Reed watched silently from the back of the room, waiting for the right moment to intervene. When the moderator finally called for a break, Reed stepped forward, addressing the crowd with calm authority. "I understand why these issues matter to you," he began, his voice steady but empathetic. "But let's remember why we're here: to create a better environment for everyone. Rules are important, yes, but so is compassion. Instead of pointing fingers, let's figure out solutions that work for all of us." His words resonated, prompting nods of agreement from several attendees. The discussion resumed with a more cooperative tone, leading to a compromise that satisfied both sides. It was a small victory, but one that reinforced the importance of listening and finding middle ground. Outside of official meetings, Reed continued fostering connections in quieter, more personal ways. He started hosting monthly coffee mornings at his house, inviting neighbors to drop by for casual conversations over coffee and pastries. These gatherings weren't structured like formal events. Instead, they offered a relaxed space for people to share stories, ask questions, and simply enjoy each other's company. Over time, they became a cherished tradition, drawing participants from all corners of the neighborhood. During one such morning, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson approached Reed with tears in her eyes. She thanked him for bringing the community together, confessing that she'd felt isolated and forgotten until recently. Her heartfelt gratitude moved Reed deeply, reminding him why he cared so much about Willow Creek. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a tapestry of lives intertwined, each thread contributing to the bigger picture. As autumn gave way to winter, the spirit of collaboration extended beyond practical projects to include celebrations and traditions. Reed organized a holiday lights contest, encouraging residents to decorate their homes creatively. The competition sparked friendly rivalries, with families going all out to win prizes donated by local businesses. On Christmas Eve, the neighborhood gathered for a caroling event, filling the crisp night air with music and laughter. Even Ethan joined in, his shy smile lighting up as he sang alongside his peers. Through it all, Reed remained mindful of the lessons learned from the confrontation with Patricia. While it had been a painful chapter in Willow Creek's history, it had also served as a catalyst for change, a reminder that conflict, when handled constructively, could lead to growth. He understood now that no community was perfect, nor should it strive to be. What mattered most was the willingness to embrace imperfections, support one another, and celebrate the unique qualities that made Willow Creek special. As the year drew to a close, Reed stood on his porch one chilly evening, gazing at the twinkling lights strung up around the neighborhood. The sight filled him with pride, not because everything was flawless, but because they had weathered storms together and emerged stronger. Willow Creek was far from perfect, but it was home, and for Reed that was enough.